So, welcome everyone to another talk by American Zoroastrian Society. What does it mean to be a Zoroastrian? A talk by Miss Shahin Bekhradnia. Please keep yourself muted. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. I've known Shahin for a few years now, and the longer I get to know her, the more I admire her steadfastness in promoting Zarathustra's message and creating a welcoming community, especially at the World Zoroastrian Organization. So it is my honor to introduce her today to you. Shahin Bekhradnia was born in London of Iranian Zoroastrian parents. She studied anthropology, focusing in Zoroastrianism at Oxford University. She later founded a school in Oxford and became a crime and family court magistrate. She has given talks and published articles on Zoroastrianism, which also has inspired her environmental consciousness. Shahin Jan, it is a pleasure to have you here and thank you for accepting our invitation. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Artemis. It's very generous and kind of you to invite me to talk to anybody who's interested in participating and hearing what I have to say. And of course, there are many different people with different interpretations of what it means to be a Zoroastrian. But I'm going to start with this word Zoroastrian because you could call yourself, you could call yourself a Sasanianist, or you could call yourself a Vendidadist, or you can call yourself anything. But the point is that if you call yourself a Zoroastrian, then this means that you are actually subscribing to the message of Zoroaster. And the message of Zoroaster is only to be found in one place. It is not by the way, there's somebody who may be trying to get in. I don't know if that's just a message that's come through to me trying to get in, so somebody will deal with him. The message of Zoroaster is only to be found in the Gathas. It is not to be found in late Sasanian texts. It is not to be found in Pahlavi texts. It is only to be found, and of course that message is replicated in some later Sasanian and Pahlavi texts, but the pure message of Zarathustra, or Ashur Zarathustra, is only to be found in the Gathas. And unless our priests, our community members, our leaders start and accept and recognize and admit that that is the only basis for practicing and calling yourself a Zoroastrian by following the message of the Gathas and not by much later textual rituals and demands that came way later, then only can you call yourself a Zoroastrian. And I fear and I suspect that a large number of people who do call themselves Zoroastrian, whether they're of Iranian origin or whether they're of Parsee origin or whether they're even of other origins, I cannot say. But on the whole, many Parsees, many Iranians call themselves Zoroastrians merely by virtue of having been born of Iranian parents. Whereas the people who choose to come to our faith from the outside make a point of learning and studying the Gathas. And when you understand what the Gathic message is and you try to live according to that message, only then can you say that you're a Zoroastrian. And I'm saying this with particular focus on the fact that many people seem to subscribe to the Sasanian period of Zoroastrianism. Through no fault of their own, many people haven't had the opportunity to study Zoroastrianism in the way that I've been privileged to. And many people haven't had the academic background, they haven't had the sources, they haven't had the training and discipline necessarily to appreciate that Zoroastrianism is a very, very ancient religion that goes back to 3,300 years before. In other words, 1,300 BC, 1,400 BC approximately, based on the language of the Gathas. So if you just look at Zoroastrianism from a much later source, and the most common sources are the Sasanian and post-Sasanian sources, then you are going to get a very different view of Zoroastrianism. When the Parsees who left Iran and became known as Parsees because they came from Pars province, and Persia was known as, Iran was known as Persia to many people, the Parsees came at the time when there were many Sasanian practices in vogue. I wouldn't say in fashion, but it was the practice. It was the tradition that had become established. You need to remember that the Sasanians came to power in the 3rd century AD, and they were then defeated by the Arabs, and Islam was imposed in the 7th century AD. So that means for 400 years, a completely new, invented form of Zoroastrianism was introduced by a high priest called Kartir, before him Tonsar, but Kartir was responsible for introducing new ideas. He did his best. Let us give him the benefit of the doubt. He was the high priest. He was the guy who survived over 4 or 5 different kings, and his job was to recreate Zoroastrianism because it had been lost. We had lost our texts, we had lost our knowledge, and the dynasty of the Sasanians were priests. So they had kept an interest, they had kept the spirit, they knew about good thoughts, good words, good deeds, they knew a lot about the spirit of Zoroastrianism, but they did not necessarily have access to the original Gathas. And therefore, they lost a lot of what was in the Gathas. And the message is that in the Gathas, you have very clear indications of Spenta Mainyu and Angra Mainyu as internal conscience. We have this thing called a daina, a conscience, or a thrausha, the voice of listening, the listening ability. And if we were to listen to our thrausha and be concerned with our daina, our vojdan, our conscience, we, according to the Gathic texts, are given the ability to discern between right and wrong through developing our minds. And what we call Ahura Mazda is the Lord of the mind. It is the Lord of wisdom. God, essentially, if you like, is our construct. We create the concept of God through our minds. And it is through that inner understanding, the wisdom that is given to us by Ahura Mazda, if you like, a concept in itself, the mind, the wisdom that we have in our brains that has given us the ability to make that decision about right and wrong, to listen, to become aware that we have choices. We don't act as automatons or AI robots that have been fed algorithms. We have free choice to use our own rational intelligence, the herad, the mind, the dina, and to listen. So to be a Zoroastrian is to recognize some of these very basic principles, which were lost in the time of the Sasanians, because they lost the concept of Spenta Mainyu and the contrasting opposite pull or energy towards the negative, which is Angra Mainyu, and instead conflated Ahura Mazda, which is the Lord of Wisdom or the mind, and Angra Mainyu, which they called Ahriman. So it went from Ahura Mazda to Urmaz and to Ahriman. And they completely lost this idea that Ahura Mazda was the Lord of the mind that gave us the ability to think. And from thinking, we arrive at the ability to make rational decisions, to listen, to decide, to make choices, and to carry the consequences of our choices. So I start by trying to remind people that if we say that we are Zoroastrian, it means that we have consciously listened to, read, found out about, make a point of trying to understand what we mean when we say we're Zoroastrian. It means that we have actually become familiar with the message of the Gathas. And when you move on through the Gathas, there are many other very, very important and interesting messages. Now, I don't want to focus only on the Gathas, but it's a really important starting point. There's no point in calling yourself a Zoroastrian if you end up doing the things that some of the Sasanians might have done. One of the big texts that the Sasanians paid a lot of attention to and brought back into the fore was this Vandidad, which was once known as the Videvdat, which means against the evil spirits. Now, in the Gathas, we do not have evil spirits. We simply have a conscience that you yourself make decisions about. You listen to or you don't listen to. It is not described as an evil spirit. However, in the Vandidad, you read all about, it's a very misogynistic text. It talks about women bringing evil spirits with them, bringing pollution with them. It is a very, very negative, un-Zoroastrian text with a few Zoroastrian things thrown into it. There is, to be fair to the Vandidad, some very positive sections about nature, about the environment. And so we can say that that part of it is Zoroastrian. But it is my belief that the religion of Zarathustra, before he had his revolutionary message, was probably something very similar to what the Videvdat is teaching or taught. And when you have a new religion, you cannot overnight just dispel and get rid of all the previous teachings and belief systems that people were subjected to and bought into. It is my belief that the Videvdat was slowly but surely it was absorbed into Zoroastrianism, or Zoroastrianism was accommodated into that, and they lived side by side. And when the Sasanians needed and wanted to reinvent Zoroastrianism to make it a religion for the empire, and remembering that they themselves were priests, they gathered it. We are told in text that it was Cartier's intent to bring Zoroastrianism from all corners of that world that had once practiced Zoroastrianism. We can look at Margiana, Sogdiana, the places that were on the remote corners and to the west, to the east, from all parts of what had once been initially the Achaemenid Empire, then later the Parthian Empire that went right into Central Asia. And then, of course, the Sasanians themselves had been parts of Africa even that practiced Zoroastrianism. So if you're trying to pull together and make a state religion out of all the different little bits of Zoroastrianism and practice in local forms, it is not surprising that you get a rather peculiar form of Zoroastrianism that has very little, well, has some resemblance, but bottom line, very little reference to the Gathas. Now, we cannot necessarily assume that everybody in the Sasanian period had access to the Gathas. We can't assume that everybody in the Sasanian period was literate. We had libraries. We know about Pundishapur University and a medical school. We know that we had many poets. We had many literate people, but we can't assume that everybody had access to all the texts. So it was left to the high priest and his band of merry men who put together, redacted, and created a new form of Sasanian Zoroastrianism. And that is what produced many, many texts, some of which have got great interest. The Din Kart has got a lot of history in it, a lot of background, useful, interesting information in it. But you cannot assume that every single text that was written in the Sasanian period and post-Sasanian period has the same legitimacy, and therefore it is not valid for you to go and look at those texts and then construct your version of Zoroastrianism based on that. You must, if you want to be true and authentic, go back to the Gathas. And today we are very fortunate. We have the Gathas in many languages, translated by scholars from the West and scholars from India and scholars from Iran. And so it has now got to a point where we have many translations, but they do more or less have a consensus in the content. And on the whole, we have good insight into what Zarathustra was teaching us. I've talked about the conscience and the dhyana, but he also taught us to develop Vohu Manah, clear thinking, through a consistent, conscious attempt to develop mindfulness, thinking processes, so that we can engage in the correct decision-making processes when we need to. He also stressed this idea that we should follow the path of Asha. Now, Asha is a very difficult concept to express because it's not just one concept, but it is not so very different from a much later concept developed by Buddha, the way of the Tao, or Confucianism perhaps is a better analogy, the way of the Tao, the way of the right path. But the right path is not just one thing. Asha not only means truth and purity and enlightenment, which we associate with the concept of fire, enlightenment, truth, purity, energy, but it also means order, harmony, regularity. And if we want to follow that path, we have to consider all those aspects to try and develop ourselves on the correct path. And Asha is a very important concept because in Zoroastrian, in Zarathustra's message, he talks about the times, the turbulent times in which he lived. But of course, sadly, he was not the only person to be living in turbulent times. We also live in turbulent times. The world has always had turbulence in some societies or other. And the message from Zarathustra was to try and create a harmonious society for the good of the people. Now, today we have politicians who try to organize our lives for the better, for the betterment of the society we live in. That is what we hope and expect of politicians and rulers. And Zarathustra also expected that, but lamented that the rulers of the time, similar to some rulers in some places even today, are ruling not for the benefit of the people, but for the benefit of their own pockets, their own families, their own longer-term good, and their longer-term futures when they might have to get out quickly, but have a bolt hole with a financial backing and a secret bank account somewhere. So he was lamenting the fact that the leaders at the time did not produce a harmonious, peaceful society, but were engaging in violence and engaging in exploitation. He talks about anger, rage, rape, and plunder. So the poor people were subjected to violent, exploitative rulers. And he also criticized the priests of his time. He calls them the Karapans, and they were also people who exploited the superstition, the fear of the people, who did not understand why certain things happened, and they were making the people pay them, probably do things that they were not perhaps wanting to do, but were persuaded to do out of superstitious fear. And so his message was a revolutionary message in as far as he was trying to undo some of the difficult situations that society was experiencing at the time, and to put in its place a new message, a message of harmony, a message of happiness for society, a message for a society that worked. And to build that society, he was advocating this path of Asha, which is mainly based on the idea of telling the truth, of being honest, of keeping your word, keeping your contract, keeping your promise. And if you build a society that's based on people trusting each other, because we all buy into the same values as each other, if we all agree we want a society where we can all work together, then and only then is there trust built. And when you have trust, then you can hope to have a society that can cooperate, that can believe that when they say they're going to do something, something will be done. So that, I believe, is a society that we should be trying and aspiring to build through our own endeavors, following this philosophy of Asha. Now, there are other things that we need to do if we say that we're a Zoroastrian following the principles of the Gathas. When we talk about being a Zoroastrian, we have to think about not only good leadership, but we also have to think about the message that we have about Asha, which is not only truth-telling, but the path of righteousness. It is a difficult concept. And in the prayer, Asham Vohu Veheshtam Asti, right, so the best righteousness, the ultimate virtue, is following this path of Asha. It brings happiness. So why would there be the mention of happiness in our ultimate mantra prayer unless we understand that we are only on this earth once? The message in the Gathas does not tell us to hope for a better future. I'm sorry, somebody is talking while I'm talking. It would be kind if you would mute, please, while I finish my talking. And then when you have a question at the end, perhaps you could address it to me. So the path of Asha, which is connected with the path of truthfulness, is also to do with the idea of happiness, bringing happiness to this world as well. And in the Asham Vohu, as I said, there would be no point in mentioning Asha unless we are ushta, no pun in talking about ushta, the happiness that can be brought by ultimate virtue, unless it's an important concept. And in the Gathas, he does not tell us what we should expect after we are dead, because nobody knows what we should expect after we are dead. All we know is that we live on this life here today, and it is our job to try and make the best that we can from talking about making people happy. Not just talking about it, but actually making people happy. We'd have to do it through our endeavors, through our good deeds, through our good thoughts. And if we can do that by actually performing, not just speaking, it's not just good thinking, which is great, it's not good words, which is great, but it's actually doing what we say we want to do. If we do that, then we can help towards this harmonious society that we want to create. Making people happy by good deeds, making people be happy because you are giving them a kind word. You're going to help them if they need help. You're going to shelter them if they need shelter. In the Gathas, there is even talk about hospitality. Iranian hospitality is famous today. It was even something that you find in the Gathas. Opening your door to strangers, giving people shelter and refuge when they need it. It's a very compassionate philosophy of life. And please notice, I don't like the word religion. I talk about a philosophy of life. I believe it is a philosophy. For me, religion suggests ritual, dogma, doing what other people tell you to do. And this is the opposite. This philosophy of life says we have free choice. We have our own consciences. We can choose which way we go. So we choose which way we go. It's a philosophy we can embrace. We do not just listen and do what other people tell us to. We don't just listen to the priest because they tell us to do this. We don't actually have a very highly developed hierarchy today. We did at certain times. In Sasanian times, there was a very heavily developed hierarchy, and some people blame that for one of the reasons why the Zoroastrians were defeated. We were, or in the hierarchy of priesthood, expecting far too much of the lay people. And so we are given a great degree of free choice, and we pay the price for what we do. But going back to this happiness question, it's the basis of our philosophy. We do kindness to other people. We try to give kahambars. When we haven't got a kahambar opportunity, we try to do charitable acts. And, the Parsees are famous for their charity. The Iranian Zoroastrians were very, very charitable. They started many of the Darbameres in North America when the Iranian Zoroastrians were liberated, if you like, from that terrible second citizenship, second-rate citizen mentality status that they suffered right up until the end of the Qajar period. But once they were freed from that and they were allowed to be educated, they were allowed to become entrepreneurs, they were allowed to do jobs that they had been denied in the past, then they flourished. And it is thanks to both Parsi philanthropy and Iranian philanthropy that we were able to say that we have been charitable people, fulfilling the message. And the message is do good to others, bring happiness to others, because ultimately, as we all know, if we try in the least bit to do little bits of good, if you help somebody who is blind across the road, if you've carried someone's luggage for them because they couldn't go up and down the stairs, if you do any small deed of kindness that you do, you know that you feel good about it afterwards. You get thanked, and very often those people might become your friends. So there's a real self-reward. You don't do it for the sake of reward, but you get a reward. And you know that in the Tandurusti prayers, we say, Saboko Khoram Oshada Asanamon Begzaran. It's across the Chinavad Bridge when we die. We ask to please allow us to pass the bridge, Sabuk, lightly, Khoram, happily, and Shad, with joy. Our consciences are light because we know that we have done good deeds in this world to help make us die with a clear conscience. Now, you may or may not believe in the metaphorical bridge at death. That is your choice. But that is a metaphor. We don't know what happens when we die. And that's another part of being Zoroastrian, I believe. We are taught from childhood that we are here born to die. We are not immortal. We're not going to be here forever. The only thing that we can do to help us become immortal after death is through our good deeds. And that is what we have these qualities. We have the Haft Amshaspant. The first one is Ahura Mazda, if you like. And after that, we have Vohu Manah, and we have Ksatra Veryu, we have our Spenta Mainyu, and we have Khvaratat, and we have Amaratat. And Amaratat is the immortality through plants, because plants drop their seed and plants go on. And we can go on through our good deeds. And that is one of the big joys of Zoroastrianism. It teaches us about the different qualities that we need. We learn. Now, that is not in the Gathas, but it has been developed alongside the Gathas. And we know that it is quite an important aspect of who we are, to become whole human beings, to try and develop that wisdom, to get as close as we can to that concept of the Lord of the mind, Ahura Mazda, through the different qualities that we develop. So we develop the idea of purity, honesty, truth, and the symbol of fire. We develop the idea of Vohu Manah, the animal kingdom, and rightful thinking and conscious of animals in the world as part of the creation. We are conscious of the metal in the world, the fact that we need metal, it is strong, and it also is represented by the idea that we have ambition, we have strength, we have dynamism, and that is one of the strengths that we all need as human beings, determination and strength to carry on. We also have Spenta Mainyu, which is the humility, the love, the nurturing, the Mother Earth idea of how the creation is made. Then we have the water, the wholeness, Khvaratat, and the idea of fertility. And then we have Hamaratat, the idea of immortality through good deeds, represented by our plants. So we have all these very beautiful concepts that are all connected with nature, Mother Nature. So when we say we want to try and do good and bring happiness and bring order, one of the most important aspects of order is giving order to the natural world. We have to accept that we are here and we will be gone. What we leave behind is good deeds. And one of the good deeds that the Zoroastrians were very good at in the past and was immortalized, in fact, not just by Darius, who had his gardens at Parsee, and Cyrus, in fact, had his gardens at Parsee, and Darius also, Darius made gardens around Taht Jamshid. And then we know some of these things from our historical sources from Iran. But the Greeks, even though they were considered to be the enemies of the Iranians, actually wrote very positively. Most notable of all is Xenophon, who wrote a book that we call the Cyropedia, which is about Cyrus's childhood. Now, it is based on his experience. Xenophon worked as a mercenary alongside Cyrus, who challenged in 401, challenged the Achaemenid king Darius, and he was fighting in his mercenary army, and he got to know the Iranians very well. And his Cyropedia is really a hagiography, a praise, a text of praise about the way that the Iranians developed their idea of kingship and how the Iranians loved their gardens, loved their trees, planted trees at every opportunity and flowers. So the tradition of the Persian garden, the beautiful gardens we have in Esfahan and Shiraz and Bagh-e-Aram, and the Persian carpet, which is considered to be a garden on the floor that you can have in your sitting room. You have your own garden in front of you. Is full of the motifs of the parterre, the four sections of the garden that was borrowed into formal Italian gardens and French gardens. So the concept of gardening and trees and planting and nature very much celebrated and remembered by Xenophon the Greek. And we still today, as Zoroastrians, believe that we look after nature, we respect all aspects of nature. We have a very beautiful tradition as Zoroastrians, which has been to some extent lost, but I know that until not that long ago, the Parsees also had something quite similar. Some of the older Parsees might remember their parents teaching them that. But my father taught me that when we have children, we plant a tree that brings forth fruit or nuts that's useful to us. And when someone dies, we plant an evergreen that will go on and on and on, living beyond that person's life, their children's life, and their grandchildren, so that there's always a memory of them. The idea of planting trees had its symbolic function, but it was actually very meritorious because it brings oxygen, it brings joy, it brings shade, and it, of course, brings fruit and nuts, if that's what we are after as well. So some beautiful aspects of nature built into our religion. And of course, all our festivals What it means to be a Zoroastrian is to respect nature, to understand we don't pollute water. We take responsibilities. We do what we can to minimize waste. We don't go and buy a second car or a third car or a big car that guzzles petrol when you can get by with one car and a bicycle. We should not do this thing about trying to keep up with the Joneses because our next door neighbor has gone and bought something bigger and better. We should use our money. Earning money is a great meritorious thing. But let us earn our money and use it in a positively constructive way to help our community benefit. So the whole thing about working, earning, spending is all about the choices that you make, using the kherad, using the Vohu Manah that you've developed, how to use the good fortune that you may have. And what we have to always remember is that however much we may want something else, there has always got to be room in our pockets to put a little bit aside for somebody who's got less than ourselves. It's one of the great philosophies, I think, that we were taught as children. Of course, if you're rich and you're lucky and you've got land and spare cash, you can put on a gahambar. You can give the benefit of your land, the fruit, the nuts, the cereal crops, the benefit, the finance that comes from that towards a gahambar to benefit the whole community. But if you live in New York or if you live in Los Angeles, if you live in London, I don't have a field where I'm growing wheat, but I'm earning money. And every so often I can do something charitable, something good, sponsor somebody for raising a dialysis machine for somebody who needs a kidney transplant, or to do something towards research on the brain for Parkinson's. Whatever you do, the important thing is to always keep in your minds that we are known to be charitable people and we have a responsibility to maintain our reputation. It's no good just living on the reputation that others have built. We have the responsibility also to do good in this world and to leave a good reputation behind so that we don't damage or sully our forefathers who worked so hard to get to this point today, where I am able to thankfully talk to you on the basis of what my parents gave me as teachings, not just by words, but by example, by deeds. It's no good telling your children, I'm a Zoroastrian, you're a Zoroastrian, learn your prayers, if you don't teach them the actual meaning of what it is to be a Zoroastrian. So this is why I'm kind of stressing that it's not enough to say I was born a Zoroastrian. My parents did Parsee Panchayat this way, or my parents in Zarathushtra, Iran, did this thing in this way. It's not good enough just to talk about it. The important thing is to put it into practice. And whether you wear a sedre and a kushti or not, that doesn't make you more Zoroastrian. Being a Zoroastrian is more than just the outward ritual. It's about what you do with your life and how you make a difference. And I mentioned that Zarathustra talked about the terrible state of the, I couldn't call it politics, society, the disarray, the turbulence of society at his time. It seems to me that where we have the energy, the ability, and the brains to work out where we think we are going wrong, and if we have ideas to contribute to society, we should not hold back. We should be part of that society, contributing into that society. We should be active. And he especially talks about we should look after our homesteads, our homes, our villages, our towns, our provinces, and our country. He actually breaks down society into all these segments. And we too have a responsibility to try and improve our household. He talks to husbands and wives. He talks to them, as it says, when you marry, you are a partnership. You are equal. You are ham sag. You are equal as both of your heads of the household. And you are working together to bring about the most fruitful cooperative existence for the future generations that you're going to create. So equality, decency in the home, examples of men and women being equal and well treated by the other with respect, that starts at home. Then you go into your village, you can join your parish council. Then you can go into your local council. Then you can go into your county council. Then you can go into your parliament, your senate. These are all steps that if you feel that you can carry that responsibility and you want to make a difference, you can start doing some representation, speaking out, speaking your mind. One of the things that we have always been quite reluctant to do, I think, as Zoroastrians, is because we have lived in a condition where we have lived in fear. But we who do not live in fear anymore have a kind of responsibility to make a contribution by speaking out. Now, we have a population still that are vulnerable in Iran, maybe vulnerable in other parts of the world. So we have to get that balance right. But we should not be frightened of saying we want to help in a society to make a better society. And we believe that our energy, our good mind, our thoughtfulness, and our philosophy that comes from centuries of trying to do good should cover certainly aspects of nature and the environment. We should be at the forefront of advocating for the environment and calling out where we see things that are not right. For example, where I live in Oxfordshire, we had the most beautiful Cotswold Hills, a Cotswold view, but we have an outrageous scandal about sewage being released into our local streams. It is an outrage, and people are getting paid very, very high salaries to be in charge of our water systems. Well, that is now being called out. They are being put to task. They're being questioned. They're being punished. Their bonuses are being taken away, but not enough is being done. That's an example of where you can do something, even if it's a bit passive and you sign a petition. It's a start. It's a move. You must be. I believe we have responsibilities to make our society better, and we can do it in many, many ways. On the small scale, by being kind, by being neighborly, by saying kind words to people who are depressed, who need support, by giving refuge to people who are refugees without wanting to show off. The fact remains that if you have a large house, you can perhaps accommodate people. I have had Afghan refugees living with me, a family, husband, wife, and child for 8 weeks. I've had Ukrainian mother and son living with me for 6 months. I've had an Iranian Zoroastrian refugee whose father converted back in the days of the Shah when it was possible to convert to Zoroastrianism. And one of our mubeds, Rashid Shahmerdan in Tehran, converted 30 people from Ahvaz to Zoroastrianism. One of them was betrayed by his neighbors when the revolution happened, and he was beaten to death. And one of his children ended up in England, had been living with me until last week for a few weeks because life treated him rather badly and sadly. And this is the sort of thing that we could do. More of us could do it. We have to be a little bit more open, a little bit more trusting, a little bit more optimistic about the nature and character of people, and give them the benefit of the doubt and show that empathy as humane, decent people who want to try and bring happiness to others. Now, it's all very well to say all this, and not all of us have the ability to do that. Not all of us have the energy to do it. Not all of us have the financial means to do it. But we have, in our own little ways, that possibility. And it is taking the first step, being conscious, making decisions that we can do something, whatever it is. And I urge us all today. I have just been, in fact, Artemis, I have been with Arzan today. We've been gathering young people in a forum to say, well, what can young Zoroastrians do to take this forward? It's all very well saying that I was born a Zoroastrian, as I said, but what can we do? We are now in diaspora. We have a responsibility, each of us, to do what we can for our own communities. I, as a diaspora Zoroastrian, do what I can for my community in England to try and maintain some tradition. I'm conscious that once I am gone, we need others, or when I've run out of energy, or when I can no longer walk, or whatever happened, we need other people to pick up the mantle and carry it forward. We need much more participation, engagement. We need people to pull their weight and say, I am willing to play my part and contribute towards our society carrying on. Because if we don't have participation from our own members, then how can we hope to carry on this knowledge and this beautiful philosophy of life? And bringing us back to the Gathas again, to say that I am a Zoroastrian means that I have to accept that we as Zoroastrians in the Gathas learn that this message that Zarathustra is putting out there, saying that we should listen to our conscience, learn to make the right decision, develop mindfulness, Vohu Manah, trying to move towards ultimate wisdom, Ahura Mazda. We need to know that this message of kindness, goodness, truth-telling, honesty, decency, other people. It is self-evident that you cannot have a successful philosophy of life unless it is shared by other people. You can be a one-man show and do it on your own, and you're an island where nobody takes any notice. But if it has any merit, as clearly as Zoroastrianism did have, it was adopted and shared by other people. We know that Darius, for example, when he established Tahta Jamshid Persepolis, put in 4 silver tablets with cuneiform inscriptions in the corners. And he talks about, by the grace of Ahura Mazda, I have been made king, and it is my duty to rule justly and bring fairness and kindness to the people I rule over. So he was conscious of his responsibility as king. We know that Cyrus the Great, some people say he was a Zoroastrian, some people say he wasn't. I happen to believe that he was probably, yes, a Zoroastrian, although we have no clear evidence. For Darius we do, because he talks about Ahura Mazda. Cyrus does not mention Ahura Mazda, but we know that he was tolerant. We know that although he conquered, he did not force other people to adopt religion that he was practicing. He allowed everyone in Babylon to practice their own religions. And not only that, but he freed the Jews who were in the prisons of Nabonidus, having been taken prisoner in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and he helped them go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Not all of them wanted to. Some of them stayed and adopted Zoroastrian ideas, and some of them even went as far as to perhaps incorporate Zoroastrian concepts into Judaism. So there was a lot of sort of stuff going on, and we have to understand that it was something for everybody to buy into if they wanted. It was not something that could be limited to a race. It was not limited to a particular group of people with a particular style of living. It was open to everybody. And that is precisely what we believe the Gartic message is today. People who have choice, people who have the ability to make decisions, should not bar other people from joining them. People who are in authority should be welcoming if they buy into the same philosophy, if people think that this is the right way to go, as long as they are decent and as long as they are sincere, and there are certain criteria by which they can be tested, by which they can be, established as good, decent people who buy into the same philosophy. Why should we be judgmental and say, no, they're not born of the same caste as us or the same race as us? That is just not acceptable. It is not the way that we were taught to think in the message of the Gathas. And similarly, I am very vexed about the way that some people have come to the question of women. Women are not polluting. Women are not full of evil spirits. Women do not bring bad luck. That is the message that you find in the Vandidad, in a lot of the parts of the Vandidad. People have to be punished, they have to be flogged. It's full of punishment and negativity, totally un-Zoroastrian, totally full of demonology and weird numerological ideas that are completely alien to what we learn in the Gathas. But certain people promote that sort of thinking. It is, in my opinion, not Zoroastrian, and it is a shame and a disgrace that is being promoted in the name of Zoroastrianism. But women in the Gathas are mentioned, men and women. Listen to my message. If it is for you, embrace it, choose it with your own open mind, with your own ears, and make the decision that you want to or you do not want to belong to this community of like-minded people. So the Gathas is very open about men and women being part of the community. As I said, he talks about to his daughter Purutista when she's getting married, and to the husband to be, that you are equal in status as husband and wife. You work together to cooperate to produce a wonderful new life and household for the future. And that is the message of the Gathas. So the distortion that I find in some communities where women have got lesser rights than men and are denied access to certain places of worship on account of the fact that they might have married somebody who wasn't born into the Zoroastrian community is absolutely un-Zoroastrian. And it is a shock and a disgrace that priests stand in the way of this equality and say that those women should not be admitted because they married out, but men can go and do whatever they want to do. The children of women who marry out can't have their initiations, but men who marry out can. That is so alien. It makes me very upset because it's an insult to the teachings of the Gathas, and it needs to be called out and dealt with in no uncertain terms. And gradually, and of course it is being right now, because as I speak, this is a matter that's actually in the Supreme Court in India, and they've already given indications of the way things are being thought through. It was, I think, mentioned and said publicly that just because a woman of Zoroastrian background marries out, she doesn't automatically just lose her entitlement to be a Zoroastrian. And that's a very obvious matter. Religion or faith or a way of thinking is absolutely private and personal. How can that be taken away from you? But that status conferred certain rights in certain societies, and that luckily is now being questioned. So when I say, what does it mean to be a Zoroastrian? It doesn't mean putting your Sedra and Kushti on every day and saying your prayers 5 times a day or even 2 times a day. It doesn't mean bowing down, doing ritual, putting ash on your forehead, kissing the railings, and exchanging, doing rituals. Those are very beautiful rituals. Anybody who wants to do them can do them. But that does not define being a Zoroastrian. That is a peripheral matter. I respect our priests enormously. My grandfather was a very renowned priest from Yazd. He was a poet, he was a mathematician, he was a stargazer. I have absolute respect for him and what he did. He and our Parsee priests from India and the Iranian priests who withstood all the persecution they had to go through, they kept this going through thick and thin, and they transmitted the oral tradition faithfully to the point where it could be transcribed. And without that faithful oral transmission, given that we were subjected to so many aspects of cruelty, we were forced to burn our Zoroastrian literature books in front of the eyes of the priests, and they were commanded to bring them to certain rulers in Iran. The Safavid king Shah Sultan Hussein was a notoriously cruel king to the Zoroastrians. He pogromed destroyed the whole of the area in Isfahan where the Zoroastrians lived, and he had books that were extant then. He commanded the priest to bring them, and he burnt them in front of their eyes. And this happened not only once. He's one we know about. There have been other mentions. So we lost our literature. We know that Iskandar, we call him Alexander the Cursed, not the Great. He apparently, by mistake, set fire to the Royal Library in Persepolis. We know that the Arabs probably destroyed a lot of our libraries. We know that Gundi Shapur, which was a great repository of knowledge, was destroyed at some point. We had literature, we had literacy, but unfortunately it was lost. So our priests conducted themselves in the most honorable way by passing on the knowledge by oral recitation. But sadly today, it is the job of a priest to understand what he's saying and to understand it and go back to the original message, not just to recite like a parrot, because nowadays we don't need recitation like a parrot. We have books we can read from. We have translations we can understand. So the job of the priest, in my opinion, is to carry on the beautiful traditions of the Asna ceremony and the ceremony, but they are separate. They are ceremonies for the sake of tradition, for the sake of something that we've carried on for centuries and centuries we don't want to lose. But we must come back to what does it mean to be a Zoroastrian. And the only place where we can authentically look for a definition of being a Zoroastrian is in the message of the Gathas. And the Gathas, for only being 72 verses, contains an awful lot of interesting information, but ideas that Zoroaster held. They said he talked about the violence. He asked, what makes the sun go round? And what makes the earth go round? What makes the moon? What makes the stars? What makes the seasons change? And he was interested in the questions of what is the natural cycle of the world? What makes nature work? And we don't know. We don't know. We can't say something up in the sky. It's just an energy we don't understand. But it was a question that he asked. He was showing intelligence, enlightened thinking. And nobody has the example of the exact answer. We have hypotheses. We now have science. We now have understanding. And Zoroastrianism, the beauty of Zoroastrianism is that it is a progressive religion. We can build on what we know. We're using our wisdom. We're using our minds. We're using our rational thinking to come to conclusions. So at the end of the day, you will find an awful lot in the Gathas, but the Gathas is not easy to read. It is, of course, an ancient language, and I don't claim to read the language of the Gathas. I have been to Gartic classes with, some people might know Elizabeth Tucker. She used to teach Gartic classes, and I used to attend her classes in Oxford. very hard work. You need to be an Indo-European philologist. I know quite a few languages, so I could kind of just about get the hang of it. But I read in translation. But the translations are sometimes quite obscure. And there are some contradictions, some differences in the translations. But bottom line is you can get the general message of the Gathas, and you can read several different versions. You will see the general message is pretty much the same. There are little bits of information about all sorts of things. And it is a gem. It is revolutionary. It is radical. And it is good for all time. It is not locked into the time and place when it was composed. This is why I think it's so amazing. Because the message is a philosophy of life that is pertinent and relevant for today. So when I say, what does it mean to be a Zoroastrian? I hope I've made it clear to you. It's not about ritual only, and it's not about Gatha only, although from my opinion it's mostly Gatha. It's about marrying the two. Tradition is beautiful. Payal Sedran Kushti is beautiful if you have that habit. I respect and envy people who got into that habit. I did not develop that habit, but I did develop, putting into practice, I hope, the message that the Gathas has taught me. And that is done by example from parents to a great extent. If you're the very fortunate person who has parents who embodied Zoroastrian principles, then it is much easier to put them into practice. And if you did not, then you can study the Gathas and make it part of your aim and your ambition to start putting into practice things that you might learn from it. So I think that, Artemis, my hour is probably up. And I think I've probably given you an insight into what I mean when I say, what does it mean to be a Zoroastrian? Now, many of you may not agree with me. And if I have overlooked aspects that you want to ask me about, I'll do my best to answer. I'm not a know-all, and I'm not omniscient. So I can only do the best that I can in answering anything that comes up. But over back to you now, Artemis.
Thank you so much, Shahin. Such a beautiful talk, and we've learned so much, and I think you brought it all together so nicely. We truly appreciate it. We have quite a few questions, and I see Karishma has her hand up too. So I'll ask one of the chat questions, and then I'll go to Karishma, and then go back to chat questions. So one of the questions in the chat says, is it appropriate to speak of the Avesta as the sacred scriptures of Zoroastrianism, or should we say instead the Gathas fulfilled this role? This question is by Anthony.
Right. Well, the Gathas are part of what we call the corpus of scriptures, the Avesta. So the Gathas are embedded in the Avesta. So the Avesta is just a generic, there are two meanings to Avesta. There's the Avesta language, and there's the Avesta corpus of texts. And when we talk about the Avesta, it's a generic meaning, generically used to mean the religious scriptures the scriptures that the Zoroastrians may turn to in saying their prayers. But that is not to say that they all have equal value, in my opinion. This is my opinion, although they all have equal validity. Some of them are very late in production. For example, the Avesta Tandurusti is spoken in a Persian language that we can all understand if we are Persian language speakers. That is a prayer that asks for good health upon us, and from centuries to come, may the Zoroastrian religion flourish, may it go from strength to strength. It's a kind of imprecation to the to serendipity, to the powers that be, to the energy of the world. May we flourish. But that's just a prayer, and it's part of the Avesta. It's just an imprecation. Most of the prayers that we call prayers of Avesta are what we call Niyayesh. They are praises. They're praises to the fire, praises to water, praises to the land. Each of the different elements has a prayer that is a prayer of praise. So it's not like saying you must do this, you must do this. It's not a dogma prayer. It's not a prayer that gives us doctrinal information. They're just accumulations. And much of the Avesta is actually a translation from remember that we're talking about a very, very ancient language, the Gartic language, which is from 1300 BC, then probably the younger Avesta from the Achaemenid times up to the Parthian times. And then we have the Sasanian language of Pahlavi. So we have at least three languages, if not four. You can count the modern Farsi that you find in the Tandurusti. 4 layers of language. So when we say, example, Homato huchto havareshta. That is a young Avestan. When we say Meneshni, Koneshni, Goveshni, as in Pahlavi, but it means the same thing. It is simply a translation of Homato huchto havareshta. So it is Meneshni, thinking, Goveshni, speaking, Koneshni, acting. But it is actually a translation. And then much of the Avesta is exactly that. There's translations and commentaries on previous texts. So we cannot say that they're all just as important as each other, but we have put them together as a corpus of text because most people don't know what bits are what. So it's safer to have them there and you recite bits that people tell you are appropriate. If you want to do an Artesh Nyayesh, praise to the fire, you would find a section that's called Artesh Nyayesh, for example. But they're all part of the corpus of the Avesta. I don't know if that's helpful, but it kind of gives you an insight into how the scriptures have been put together.
Thank you, Shahin. Karishma, do you want to unmute yourself? Are you still there?
Yes, thank you, Artemis Jan. Thank you very much, Shahin Jan. You beautifully mentioned nurturing nature as part of our work as Zoroastrians. And yet, at another time, you talked about sharing with our community, quote unquote, our community. I'd like to give this opportunity to you to explain what you mean by sharing with our community, because in Asho Zarathustra Sahib's message, I see Frashostamem making the whole world a better regenerated place, which we also pray in the Kasti prayers and Yasna 50 verse 11.
Yes,
Thank you.
so thank you for the question, Karishma. When I say our community, as I said, you begin with the home. That's what Zarathustra broke down. You begin with a home, you try and improve your home environment first. Try and make it a place where it is friendly and accessible to each member, where everybody feels at ease, that they have a role to play, that they have worth, they're appreciated. And then if that works within the community, within the household, you might have time for your community. I live in a tiny little village. So that when I want to do something, I do something in my village first. I help my neighbors. I go to visit the people who are sick in my village. After that, I may give my energy to my community. I organize, for example, this is just what I can do. This is how I interpret it. I organize in the days when we were doing paper recycling before it became a fashionable thing. I organized the first paper collection from people's houses, and we took it to a recycling center. Then you do something on the county council or the local council. You can keep on moving forward or doing things on a bigger scale. You can work in schools, you can work in prisons. These are all parts of our community today. We now live in this community. We can work for the Zoroastrian community, and I do quite a lot that I can do, where people ask me to, or they're receptive to what I can do, I will do it. If Artemis asks me to do something, I'll do it with pleasure. If Malcolm asks me to do something, I do it with pleasure. If somebody asks me to do something, I would, for example, today the Arbanu or whatever Ashra Center, I'll do it with pleasure. But the point is, it's not just the Zoroastrian community. We live in the world, as you say. So I do something for my village, I do something for my neighbors, I do something for my community, whatever I can. My local prison, I'm a magistrate. I've been a magistrate for 32 years. I go to the court. I don't get paid. I'm not thinking only about money in my pocket. I'm thinking about the benefit I can bring not being paid to my community, because I believe that if we want to live in a decent, harmonious society, we need to know our society. We need to be working with the prisoners and the probationers and take poor people into our houses and understand what difficulties they've got, and work in the court and see, why do people get drunk and beat their wives up? Or why do wives, not let their husbands see their children? We need to understand in order to be and have experience to be able to then start putting our best endeavors into creating some sort of better outcome. So that is what I mean by community. We can start small, but we can look at it in the bigger picture. We are members not only of one community, we are members of many communities. As I said, it's in village and parish and school and council and community court, all sorts of places where we can put our energies. But it does need, and I say this, understanding that I am very lucky that I have got the time and the energy to make it happen. And not everybody, and I have to accept that not everybody is capable of doing it, but we should still consciously try and make a decision to do something positive in our lives if we can every day.
you very much, Shahin, for that explanation. Um, I'm going to go ahead and read one question from the chat, and then I see Ferdos has his hand up. I'll go to him after. So I have actually two questions from Miguel. The first question is, could it be possible that Buddha um, had known about Zoroaster because their philosophies are similar? And the second question from him is that, do we believe in reincarnation?
Thank you. Miguel, I have to say that I cannot tell you if Buddha definitely knew about Zoroastrianism, but I would be very surprised if he didn't, because we know that by 400 BC, which is around the time of Buddha, give or take 50 years either way, Zoroastrianism was, after all, a very important world religion, and we're talking about the time of the Achaemenid Empire. There was enormous trade going on. It was a vast empire. You know, it went from the edge of the Aegean Sea in Turkey and Greece. It actually conquered north of Greece. So it went from Greece, Egypt, the whole of the Levant, which we can call Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, right across Turkey, right across Iran, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, and then into Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, right up to Khorazm, and then eastwards going towards China. And of course, it went into India, up to the river Indus, all of Pakistan. So, of course, it's likely that there would be indications and contact. If you look at a place called Panjikant, which is in Tajikistan today, there was a Buddhist center there, there was Zoroastrian centers there, there was, I think, a Jewish center there. And this was all part of the Silk Route. People were coming and going all the time. And we know that Buddha, I think, was Nepalese by origin, and it is very close in that area of northern India and southern Nepal, where this trade route could very easily have had influences as well. So I cannot, by any from any perspective, rule out that he would have had contact, would have known about Zoroastrianism. And your second question, reincarnation, no, there is nothing in the Gathas about that. The only indication that we have about death, there are two mentions. One mention is that we cross Pulachinavad, that is in the Gathas, but it doesn't tell us what happens on Pulachinavad, except that we have to cross it to get, guess where? To the House of Song. That is the ultimate beauty and destination that our souls might aspire to go to. And the House of Song is a nebulous idea. We don't know what the House of Song is. You can make of it what you want. Some say it was the House of Light, everlasting light. But that is not what it says. It says the House of Song. So all we know is that we die, and our souls may or may not pass over a bridge to get to the House of Song. But that is, again, a construct that we humans have made. And I think Zoroaster has put that in because it is a question that he must have asked himself, what happens to us when we die? We have this energy of life. Well, what happens to the energy of life when we die? Does it just go nowhere? It goes on this path towards the integration with the energy of the cosmic universe. That is when you get to the House of Song. That's all we know. We have all sorts of death rituals today, but none of them were prescribed in the Gathas. They all developed. I mean, and a lot of them have a logic to them. Why did we use the Towers of Silence? Why did we use a dog? Nothing to do with a four-eyed dog bringing extra insights into your soul. That's a load of rubbish. The dog was brought on because a dog is a sensitive creature that can detect drugs, it can detect cancer, it can detect all sorts of other illnesses, and it can detect death. And when we did not have different sorts of electrocardiograms and ECGs for the brain and 101 different systems to determine death, if you poke someone with a needle and they don't respond, and you throw water over someone's face and they don't respond, the Iranians in the old days used to put bread on the body of a dead person. And if the person was alive, the dog would not go and take the bread. Nothing to do with a four-eyed dog with two dots on his forehead. Nothing to do with looking into the soul of the person. That, I'm afraid, is a superstitious development that has been created for the sake to justify, because we know, and I don't wish to be rude, but we know that when there was a distance of many hundreds of years and miles between our Parsi friends who went from Iran, according to the Ressa San John, believe it or take it or whatever you want, around 800, 900 BC, about 1,100 years ago maybe. They went to Iran. They went from Iran. They took the customs that they could remember. They had very many hardships. They had many stops on the way through Diu and other parts of the Gulf till they got to Diu and then to Surat. And there they had to do the best they could. And they lost many of the knowledge and customs that they had. And they used to send envoys back to Iran. We know all about this. We can read the letters. We can read the exchanges of the Parsis who would send from Navsari and from other parts of Surat as well. They would send envoys and they would get replies from Iran coming back to them saying what they could do, what they couldn't do once they'd asked the questions. And some of the questions are very interesting. So no doubt they lost the knowledge about the dog as well. They knew they had to have a dog somewhere in the system, but they forgot the reasons for the dog. And they then attributed to the dog the insight into the soul of the dead person. So there are lots of things, the whole thing about pollution and menstruation, all these things, they all had their reasons. They were not just based on pollution and evil spirits and, being worried about pollution, bringing in bad vibes. They had very good practical reasons why women were separated from men, so that they could have a rest for a week, so that they should not be embarrassed by any leakages and so on. They are very sound reasons. They're not, as some people like to interpret, and especially Western scholars who don't bother to ask, that they just construe. There's a whole thing about purity and pollution, and this whole kind of construct in anthropology about this. They don't bother to ask, well, what were the reasons? Why did you do this? My mother explained it in a very simple way, and it completely makes sense. They used to have to go down 100 steps and bring very, very heavy, big ewers of water, pitchers of water back up from the steps. If they were having their cycle, they couldn't do that. They would faint, they would fall, they would drop. They needed to have rest, and they certainly couldn't cope with the embarrassment that would be involved in any leakages. So it was a very sound time, and they got together, they played cards, they embroidered, they sewed, they mended. They had a nice time when they were in their special area, when they were segregated from the rest of the community at that time. But I just mention this because all sorts of mythologies and stories are invented and arise, and it serves the purpose of people writing theses to make it sound exotic, superstitious, and full of kind of weird cosmological, kind of intention where there didn't exist any. Zoroastrianism is a very pragmatic, sound, rational way of thinking, and it has been distorted.
Thank you, Shahin. Firdos, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, Shahin. Thank you for a very, very interesting talk. I must admit, just about 100% of what you said, I believe, and I have been believing all my life. And my question is related to that, but in a different way. So let me explain two concepts that apply over here before I ask my question.
Please do, yes.
First of all, we talk about believing and thinking. Those are two very, very opposite concepts, as I think. We also believe that it is said that we have to think before we can believe. And here is my problem. Once you go into the world of belief, which is what a lot of other faiths are, including the Abrahamic faiths, and then once you get into belief, you start having superstition and miracles, and you end up preaching rather than thinking and philosophy and teaching. Yes. The two different lines of thinking. So that's one basis. The second basis is in the name Zoroastrian, which to me is an English word. It's not even our word. But anyways, everything today is Zoroastrian, Zoroastrian, Zoroastrian. And I think people do that. People do that, attach the Zoroastrianism name to it to get credibility. Similar to what our good friend Nietzsche did to promote his philosophy. Thus spake Zarathustra. Even though Zarathustra never spoke that, he just gets credibility.
No, of course he didn't. But he at least used the right name.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to explain. That. So now I have a question for you. I agree that all of what we are practicing, can I call it Atharvanic? Can I call it Athornanic? Can I call it all this Andidadic? There are all kinds of labels I can have, just like I can have labels for Zoroastrian and this and that. My question is very simple. All my life, I've tried to get across to people, to get to understanding what Zarathustra really says and forget about this miracles and beliefs and all that. My question is, how do we do it? I've spent more than 50 years of my life and I have achieved nothing in that direction. I have not even, so far I can count five
Fedor.
people
So first
on
of all,
my
I think
hand.
you underestimate your own influence. If
So
I may
far I
answer,
can count 5 people on my hand who I think are kind of more Gothic rather than otherwise. Just about every one of us is into the other side. Can you please help me understand how we can? I want to convert Parsis to Zartusti. I don't want to worry about the non-Parsis and non-Zartustis. That's fine. I'm not against that. How do I convert my own people to understand Zarathustra's teachings and not get hung up with all this whole bunch of other stuff that is thrown in? Thank you.
Well, Fedros, I think you and I are on the same mission, because it is also my hope and my intention to try and persuade people that being a Zoroastrian, and you don't like this word Zoroastrian, and I'll tell you why I do accept it. I speak English to you in English. If I was speaking Farsi, I would say Zartushti. But I'm not speaking Farsi, I'm speaking English to you. So I use the word that is in common parlance in English. Now, you might like the word Mumbai as opposed to Bombay. That was your choice. But I do not accept that when we speak in English about the Persian language, I keep on saying Farsi. I say Farsi when I'm speaking in Farsi. I say Persian when I'm speaking in Persian. I don't say, I teach Francais, I teach French. We have to use the language that we are using to speak in. And Zoroastrian is the language, is the word that we use in English, and so that's what I use. If I'm speaking in a different language, I will use the appropriate word in that language. So I'm not hung up, and I find it very objectionable that constantly Fezana is getting herself into a terrible muddle trying to say Zarathustrian, spelling it. Every time it's spelt wrongly. I have found so many inconsistencies in the Fezana whatever they are, publications and messages and, kind of posters. And sometimes there's Zoroastrian, sometimes there's Zarathustri, sometimes there's Zarathustris. There's all sorts of THs and SHs put in the wrong place. It is stupid because it is not necessary. It is trying to be politically correct for no good reason. Who else is demanding of that? Only maybe a few people on a hand. It's absolutely unnecessary. It doesn't advance any cause any further. But what you say about how to make people aware that they should not just be tying their kushti in the sedra 5 times a day or 1 time a day or whatever they're doing, but actually to live the life. That is a different story. To accept that all the Safanian distortions and all the extra, hocus pocus that's being put out is hocus pocus. That is a big question. Now, the WZO, the World Zoroastrian Organization, had the very first colloquium, the Gata colloquium, back in the 1980s. We had people like Kehosra Irani attending. We had people like Stanley Insler attending. We had Farrokh Vajiftar. We had Dina was there. But these are the great stalwarts of the advocacy for the Gathas. These were people who knew that Zoroastrianism has nothing to do with the Sasanian texts. It's all to do with Gartic understanding. And if you're interested in what the colloquium achieved, we have thousands of volumes still available that give the proceeds and talks by the people participating in the Gata colloquium in the 1980s. It's a terribly important milestone. WZO was devoted and still is dedicated to making sure that people understand that the Gathas are the cornerstone of Zoroastrian thinking. And when you talk about belief, I agree with you. I don't do faith. I do not like the word religion. I will not call what I practice or what I believe I should be doing as a way of life. I don't call it a religion. Religion to me smacks of doctrine. It smacks of ritual. It smacks of bow down, tie your cushion, do what the priest say, do this, do this. That is fine. It's in its own right. It's got its beauty. It's got its tradition. But it is not mandatory for being a Zoroastrian. And we learn nothing that helps us be a Zoroastrian from the Sasanian text. The only place we learn how to be good human beings according to the teachings and philosophy of Zarathustra, if you want to use that word, Zarathustra, is to actually look at the Gathas. So I agree with you. I don't do faith and I don't do belief. I use my rational mind and I try to develop it. Now, of course, you might say what I think is rational is irrational to you. It's all relative. We could live in the world of relativity, but we don't. We all end up having some kind of common understanding and some sort of common language. And we have to work within those confines. So my answer to you is that we don't do belief. We do evidence. If we do good, we have the evidence of the good coming back to us. This is not to say that there are not some nasty people in the world who don't do good back to us. It doesn't always follow that if you do good, you get good back. There are some people who have no conscience. They don't listen. They haven't developed their thinking. They are somehow unable to tune in to what we're talking about. You know, not everyone is perfect. You and I are not perfect. I might tell a lie from time to time by mistake or almost deliberately because it's difficult for me to tell the truth. But we must nevertheless be conscious that we're doing that. And actually question ourselves, try to do better next time, be aware of it. There is, we have got, you know, please forgive our sins. We have got that kind of idea of patet and forgiveness, but we don't go into a confession box and then confess it all and say, well, it'll be all right now, we've confessed it all, we can kind of put that aside and carry on. We have to pay the price that we pay. We have to pay a price for doing something that's not a good idea, not good. But on the whole, please remember that we can only do what we can do, but we can do it with at least a clear thinking, a mindfulness, awareness that every time that we make a decision, we have a choice in that decision. And we can decide to try and increase the betterment of humanity through our own actions. And of course, how we do that in a community, how we take that forward. Fedos, you are like me, frustrated that we haven't been able to get more people to accept that information, the Gathas. I personally believe that one or two key people have had the consequence that 2 generations of young Zoroastrians have been lost to us, I do believe, because they've been given and believed in the wrong messages. They've been given information like you'll go to hell if you don't burn sandalwood, you'll go to hell if you marry out, you'll go to hell. I mean, you know, this is such nonsense. But to tell that to young audiences and for people to actually accept that, believe that, be frightened by that, you know, marrying out, well, what a terrible sin that must be according to certain people's precepts. That is not, of course, a sin by anybody's standards. The concept of sin in itself is a very unpleasant and un-Zoroastrian thought. You know, who is to judge what is a sin? Who are we to judge? All we know is that if it makes somebody unhappy, then it's not a very nice thing. But to call it a sin and to be punished for it is ridiculous. That is so videvdati, vandidadi mentality. It makes me sick. And I did actually challenge one of these people quite recently when I met them. And I told them directly, you have lost us 2 generations of young Zoroastrians by the rubbish that you've been spouting to them. And I sincerely believe that. So I share the frustration that not everyone has heard that message, but all we can do is keep pushing it, keep promoting it, and WZO's dedicated to trying to do that amongst many other things that it tries to do. And I'm sure that many of the other organizations today also are doing the same sort of thing, putting out, because we have the knowledge now, we have the scholarship now, we have information that didn't exist maybe 50 years ago, 70 years ago, when some of these people were being brought up by their parents. But thank goodness we have much more scholarship and knowledge today. And there is no excuse for ignoring that information.
But then the issue now is that having come to India, we have actually gone to the pre-Zarathustra thinking of the Indo-Iranian
Well, I do agree that
religions, which is practiced in India through Hinduism. And I call my Hindu friends Why are we naming all these things wrong? The word Hindu is Persian. It is not Indian. The Hindu religion name is Sanatana Dharma, according to the Vedas. And we even distorted that. Now we are distorting even more things about. So I have changed my logic many, many years now. Artemis and all of these people know my life, that for the last more than 40 years, I've tried to focus on younger people by taking children's classes, Sunday school classes, and this and that. And I'm shocked to see today's younger people coming even here to Vancouver and going to college, like university. And I ask them, generally speaking, where did you learn about our religion? Did you take any classes in India? Like I took some classes when I was growing up in Bombay. And these people have blank faces. The only religion they know is the religion taught to them by their mamajis and bapajis. And I
Thank
tell
you
them,
so much.
this is the religion of Zarathustra, not your mamaji or bapaji. And that's when they
Thank
kind
you
of
so
wake up.
much for this. Yeah, I know. Thank you so much. I know
Sorry.
it's I already we're gone over time, but I see two questions. I don't know, Shahin. I know the weather over there is really hot today. Do you
Okay.
have patience for two more questions before we end
Of
it,
course I
or
do.
should we
Of
end it
course I do.
now?
No, I'm very happy. If they want to ask questions, I'm happy to carry on. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Sorry to cut you short, Firdaus. I'm truly sorry. I want to get to these two questions before we end the session. So we have a question by Faranak. So I'll ask a question from the chat and I'll go to Faranak's question and we can end the session. So I don't know if you want to tackle the question in the chat or not, but Shayan is asking why aren't all Zoroastrian communities open to acceptance of Iranians who want to now join the community?
Right. I'm very happy to answer that question. The reason we're not open to any Iranian who wants to join the community is because we have been infiltrated in the past when we were open to them. And we found that there were some people who were working for the regime in Iran. And it was a great difficulty for us then to kind of work out and weed them out and work out how we keep them distant. And there was some damage done. And of course, the damage that is done if we start admitting people here is that it can have repercussions in Iran. And we got messages from our Iranian co-patriots and co-religionists, please don't do this. This was a time back in the 80s. Please don't do this because this is going to have dangerous repercussions for us. So for a long time, we held off and we were very, very circumspect. We have now recently had more and more and more people coming to us and asking for us, and we have established, as I said, we believe that that is the right path, but we don't only take Iranians. We have had Spanish converts, German converts, Polish converts, English converts. So we're not saying it's only Iranians who can't join us or who can join us. We have a set of criteria. And we say, first of all, the questions, why do you want to join us? Why can't you just be Zoroastrian in your way of life? Why do you have to have a ceremony? Why do you need an initiation? Our doors are open for our gatherings, our lectures, our seminars, our concerts, whatever cultural events we have, our religious events you can come and watch. Why do you actually want to have an initiation? Because this is what many people want. They want initiation. And so if they really want an initiation, despite the fact that we encourage them to go just practice being Zoroastrian, then we have laid down a number of criteria. And we want to get to know them. We need to know their backgrounds. We want to see that they are, in terms of, kind of committed, some sort of commitment. We ask what kind of community service they might have done to serve a community. What do they know about our history, our background? What do they know about the actual teachings? Where do they get their information from? So that we try to sift and find out. And we're not going to just admit anybody because he says, I want to be a Zoroastrian because I'm an Iranian and once upon a time Iranian was all Zoroastrian. That is not good enough. Having a sense of national pride is one thing. Having a commitment to a ethical, moral system where you have to commit yourself to trying to do good to other people, to tell the truth, and to be honest is very difficult for people who were not brought up in an environment where that was the norm. where an environment in which telling a lie or cheating or getting the better of somebody was considered to be rather clever and rather a good thing. That is not the experience of Zoroastrians. That is not what we do. So when we see people doing that, of course it is upsetting, and we cannot therefore just say automatically you can just be admitted, no problem. We need to have rigorous criteria. We need to get to know a person well if they want us to put our trust in them and admit them to our community. Because you know what it's like if you're Iranian. It sounds like you're an Iranian asking the question. You know that there are people who are actually in the pay of the regime to try and undermine us and to try and destroy the people who may want to leave for the faith of their fathers and go back to their ancestral faith. That in itself is a dangerous move. And so we don't want to put people in danger. I hope that gives you insight. Yeah. And I should also say two more things. One of them, unfortunately, we know we have a well-established person who is actually born into our community, who we know to be, as it were, informant. And that is very distressing. And there are several others that are suspected of being such. One or two of them are people who have claimed to become Zoroastrian. And they are thought in their communities maybe to have ulterior motives and other agendas. So the whole thing is rather a delicate matter.
Thank you, Shahin. I appreciate it. Let's go to Faranak for the last question. And Shayan John, please feel free to contact American Zoroastrian Society, and we'll be very happy to discuss this further. Go ahead, Faranak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shahin John. I am unmuted, yes. Okay. My question is, it seems like as a born Zoroastrian, I notice superstition in some areas of our culture, of Iranian Zoroastrian, versus the Zoroastrians in India. Do you think, what's the role of the society in how much superstition we take in or add to the religion?
Well, look, we have folklore, folk religion. We have Moshkel Gosha, Bibi Seshambe, we have these Sofred. These are folk traditions, and you have folk traditions in all sorts of societies. So they're very sweet and they're very beautiful, and they have got their place in society, and they are maintained because they bring a community together of old ladies, young ladies. They are in villages. They want to do these things to keep themselves together. But they are based on folkloric stories and legends. You know, the legend of the beautiful princess running away from the Arabs, and she ends up running and finding herself near Pir Sabs, and the mountain embraces her and she falls into the mountainside, and that's that. Then a miraculous spring jumps up in her place. Well, that's a very lovely tradition, but it's hardly really believable unless you are prepared to suspend all rationality and actually want to buy into. The same thing as believing that Mount Damavand has Shovar Javan going to come out of it one day. I mean, these are legends. These are stories that help to give people comfort. And when you've been persecuted and you've been exposed to all sorts of difficulties, of course you're going to look for little stories that bring you comfort, that bring the community together, that allow you to break bread together, make bread together, tell stories. It's a very sweet and lovely thing, but it has no basis in, if you like, the religion of Zoroastrianism. But folklore, legend, tradition also has its place. As I said, I don't begrudge the yasna ceremony where the priests exchange flowers and they do all this and they tap around the iron metal thing. We don't do that. We don't tap around the metal things. We don't kiss the railings of a shrine, or we don't put dabs of thingamajigs ash on our foreheads. These are all different things that evolve in different societies. That does not make it Zoroastrianism. That is folklore. That is tradition. That is something different. Within the anthropological thing, we have the little tradition and the great tradition. And this part of what you're perhaps indicating, superstition, is definitely to be found amongst quite rural people. My grandmother did not read or write on my father's side. We are from Jafarabad. We are real agricultural peasants. My mother's father was a priest, as I think I mentioned, a renowned and well-established priest. But he was not that sort of stuff. So my mother was not brought up with that. But my granny in Yaz followed also Mer Baba. Mer Baba was a Zoroastrian from a Zoroastrian family from Khorramshahr, suburb of Yaz, went off to India, became a guru in India. You know, she had pictures of Mer Baba next to pictures of Ahura Mazda. You know, that was just what she did. You know, that was her belief system. She was a simple peasant woman who would grasp onto anything that gave her comfort. And that brought her comfort. So let it be her comfort. You know, I didn't spend enough time to try and disabuse her or reteach her. It would be such an arrogance for me to come and tell her, "Oh, Granny, you know, load of rubbish what you're saying." When we had a Cedra pussy, she put something on us. What was it called? One of those arir. And you know, she put a little medallion on us that was written in Arabic, because that's what, you know, people of her kind of background used to believe in and do. Poor thing. She, you know, I didn't disabuse her of it, but you know, I understand completely what you mean when we say about superstition. But that is part of the folklore, and we have to learn to distinguish the two and embrace one of those, that side as well, but not muddle it up with the religion, which I don't like the word. I said the philosophy.
Shahin, this has been an amazing talk. Honestly, thank you so much. And we're already 1.5 hours into the talk and more questions. You have to honor us with another session in the future.
And I hope I haven't upset too many people with my slight unorthodox approach to
a very courageous technique. Thank you very, very much. We truly appreciate it. And thank you to Felix Schroller for helping me behind the scene. I also appreciate his help, and all of you for joining us today. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon in our next talk. Thank you, Shahin. Thank you.
Good night to everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.